So we decided that our movie reviews take too long, so we decided to solve the problem by saying all of our opinions at once. Ready? Go.
The title of
Avengers
I liked so misleading. I mean, Adeline wasn't even in the whole movie. Where was she? I didn't even see her at all.
Hello average people, welcome to Average Channel. I am me, these are them, and we are here to talk about the Avengers, Age of Ultron. What did we think?
I liked it.
I wish I could have seen
opinion.
Age of Adeline. That looks so much better.
Yeah, okay. No, come on, what did we think of it? Let's get into it. Let's
Okay.
What did we like? Okay, first off, I think we all did like this movie.
Oh,
as
yeah,
far as
we all
I think
it's
it's
safe to say we all loved it.
Okay.
We could all say that it was the best Marvel movie this year so far.
You're funny.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed this movie way more than I enjoyed Furious 7.
I enjoyed this movie way more than I enjoyed Furious 7 also.
But I did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Kingsman, the Secret
I
Service.
also did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Kingsman, the Secret
What about
Service.
you? You didn't see Kingsman, the Secret Service.
No.
But what about you? What do you like more? Do you need to ask me for an opinion?
You just heard it.
Can I have an opinion?
You liked it more than Kingsman, the Secret Service.
I liked it more than Kings and the Secret Service.
Okay, what did we like about the movie? We need to get into the positives before we discuss the negatives.
Well, I think we can both agree that the twins were a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, guys, how
They
about...
weren't something that stood out to me. I mean, they were good, they're fine.
Yeah.
But they didn't really add to it.
They didn't detract.
Captain America is magnitudes better in Avengers 2 than he was in Avengers 1.
Well, probably thanks to,
Special unit.
thanks to Captain America the Winter Soldier, one of the only things that carried over from the rest of these movies. I have to say, this movie... What?
I think we can all say it was extremely good fun.
It was
Yeah.
good fun.
It was a good popcorn flick.
I have to say that in our top 10 movies of last year, I briefly mentioned The Winter Soldier, and I said that one of the things I liked about it was it connected the universes, as it felt like the ending had an impact on the rest of the movies to come. And this movie had a lot of that. Like, there were a lot of things that were going to lead into other movies, a lot of like little things that were going to set up the next movies, which ultimately I guess that means that I was going into this movie saying things are about to happen, and I came out of this movie thinking things are about to happen. So, I mean, it gave me what I wanted. It felt like the rest of the universe was coming together, and it felt like tying up a nice bow for Phase 2, which isn't saying much because Phase 2 to me has always been titled Avengers, More Adventures.
Yeah. Also, people have been saying there's a lot of character development and like emotional scenes, and some people have even gone so far as to say they shed a tear or two. It wasn't quite that much, but there were some, some heartfelt moments, and there was definitely character development, much needed for Hawkeye. I like the changes they made with Hawkeye. They made him relevant, and they kind of joked like about themselves, like with how Hawkeye is perceived by the public. Like everyone thinks he's kind of useless, and they kind of joke about that. He's like, man, I'm just out here with all these aliens with superpowers, and all I have is a bow and arrow. It's weird.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed in this movie is that the jokes were good, but they were... hold on, I just want to say this. It's definitely not the best Marvel movie jokes, so I just want to say that.
What?
That's just the movie.
It's not the worst. It didn't have the worst Marvel movie.
It definitely
jokes, but it didn't have the best.
It definitely had the same punch that the rest of the movies had in terms
of flavor to it.
In terms of moving these characters forward, yes, it did have all the jokes, and it had these it got the characters right, just like the first Avengers did, just like I felt like Iron Man 3 did, and
like that scene where they were all trying to pick up Thor's hammer. I really liked
it.
Yeah, it kept the dynamic of the characters going really, really well, and it kept them alive, and I think the dynamic was better than the first Avengers, actually.
Yeah.
That's a what?
Because they're like
I agree.
They're kind of unlikely friends at this point.
But what was I about to say? Keep talking. I just
talking about Avengers 1 and the dynamic.
The most interesting scenes in the first Avengers to me were always the ones where they were talking. Like my favorite scene in the Avengers is the scene where they're all arguing, and this movie adds on to that personality of the movie. So as a whole, that was better, and that adds to the movie a lot.
And I actually like what they are arguing and they're conflicting about this time, because it's kind of like it's almost like a moral issue with what Tony Stark wants to do and the direction he wants to take the Avengers, whereas the more, I guess you could say, conservative, like Captain America, they don't want him to do this thing. So it's
They don't want him-
it's similar to
it's-
Civil War.
They don't want
It
him
felt like-
tampering with
Yeah, like it
things.
kind of
tampering with
you don't
things
have
that
to-
he
Like
did.
I felt like it was kind of building the tension, like you said the tension was already there, but it kind of
Are you talking about between Iron Man and Captain America?
like it kind of bottled it to like a point where like okay like now like their tension is about like the robots and everything.
And also Thor kind of had his side and his agenda.
Yeah.
That did not fit into the movie.
That's apparently that leads a lot into
like, also, like,
Thor Ragnarok. Like it's very Nordic mythology.
Yeah, I
Thor
could tell
stuff.
this movie definitely had a place that it needed to go. And I prefer that to movies that don't know what they want to do with themselves. But, I mean, this movie, I think you just said that, but Joss Whedon obviously wanted to do so many things. And some parts felt rushed, some parts felt they had to do certain things and they didn't really fit. Like we said, the Thor thing, and there was a thing with Andy Serkis, which I was so happy to see him not in CGI form because I love Andy Serkis. But that's the thing leading into Black Panther. You got all these things, and some of it didn't really fit. It felt forced. But I mean, remember what I said about Captain America: Winter Soldier fitting with the universe? I guess that's the sacrifice with that.
Like Ben, you don't see. I don't get. I don't get the scene where, like
Well, we're talking about a big part of the movie.
We're talking
about the movie as a
positive
whole.
side, yeah, right.
But are we going into detail now?
I guess because like I was planning to say it like when you were like some scenes didn't make any sense or like okay this one scene didn't make any sense in but okay anyway it was
I got a cold.
it was like Thor and he took that one guy to the cave and they're like okay it's like
Yeah, that's
like
the
something
thing.
yeah,
that was
out of
didn't-
place.
he-
It was
no,
very out of place.
That was in relation to the vision that he had, but we
Yeah.
can't really get into that too much.
It wasn't really.
Scarlet
I didn't
Witch-
know it was a vision at first. I thought Scarlet Witch
gave
was
him
putting
that vision.
Yeah.
things into their heads.
I love that he was
to
like
trip them up.
He was like
And
Scarlet
then they're
Witch,
like, it's a dream. It's
her
a
magic
vision.
can't affect me. I am the mighty, and like he turns
Oh,
his head,
yeah.
and there's
Yeah.
he's just like in some other. It wasn't Asgard, but it was like
He's
another
a party
realm
or something.
And so yeah, I like.
Even
that.
if you don't like this movie, the timing is really good. It gets a
Yeah.
lot of scenes right. So, what else did we like? I want to get past the things that we do like.
We
because-
liked that the
Oh,
third
I like-
act. Wait, we liked that the third act was in part of a city and not the whole city.
That was interesting because when I saw the third trailer and I saw a big building blow up, I got mad because I was like, oh my god, I got annoyed because every single movie, the final act takes place in a big city, and I was like, oh, I'd like to see a movie where there's, like, within the first act, there's a big battle that takes place in a big city, and then the third act isn't in a big city, it's like somewhere smaller. This movie gave me that. I was so happy.
I think-
Well, by smaller, it's
It's like in a
still
valley.
pretty big.
It was
but-
like in a valley, and there were buildings. Well, it was big, yeah, but it was like old, and it wasn't. There
and
was,
then they only used part of that.
The biggest thing I like about this one over the other Avengers was that the story of this one just seems more interesting. It wasn't like a clear cut plot structure like the first one was a basic
Yeah.
alien invasion. This one was a little more like the Winter Soldier. It wasn't quite as good as the Winter Soldier because that was like a really good political thriller type thing, and it was so different from anything Marvel has done. But this was also interesting plot and story wise because it wasn't so. Yeah, I don't know.
it got a little darker.
Yeah, and it was also
It actually
it was
was-
more structured and like there was more connectedness, and I just thought it was more interesting.
I
and
felt that this was
complicated.
one of the more darker Marvel
Yeah, it
movies
was darker.
because
It was.
It had a lot more like kind of death around and chaos.
Serious undertones,
And,
yeah.
just
Yeah, like
serious.
DC.
We're gonna save them and stuff. We can't just let them die.
My doggy. That's my doggy. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Was DC, of course, really dark. Marvel, really light. But you don't have to have black and white. Like this movie
Yeah.
was obviously on the fun side of Marvel, keeping the good tone, but it was a little bit darker. And that doesn't mean it goes completely dark. It had a nice balance, and I think it worked really, really well.
But that can lead into one problem was, one of the problems I had was, towards the beginning, it almost felt like it was going to go like Dark Knight Rises, where the characters were having like so much, they were at such a, like a low, and they had the obstacles they had to overcome were so great, and it felt like they were like really at, they couldn't, they couldn't deal with the problem, and then, I don't know, it kind of felt like they solved it a little
Yeah.
easy. They didn't really keep that feeling throughout the movie of like dread and that they couldn't win.
Yeah, the Avengers never were really at a low point in this movie. Like there were times where like we have to lay low, we have to go somewhere.
It was getting there, but
yeah, but it never had like The Dark Knight Rises. Of course, it's part of the Dark Knight trilogy. It's an actual beginning, middle, and end story where the final act has to really be the lowest point. So that's not a fair comparison. But that said, The Dark Knight Rises at least had its own arcs within the story, and part of it was him really dealing with this challenge of just going away and having to come back, whereas the Avengers sort of had that, but it didn't go as deep, pun intended, because it was a pit. But I was literally in my head picturing like a plot line of a movie and then it going down, and then like for Dark Knight Rises it goes really down, and then, I don't know.
One negative I had, I won't go into a lot of detail.
All right, we're getting into the negatives,
Yeah, but this movie had an even worse and forced and unnecessary and not seen in any of the other Marvel movies kind of, I wouldn't even call it a big, but love sequence. I won't tell you who
he's
it's
talking about
with.
Hulk and Black Widow didn't really going anywhere, and he was comparing it to the 47 romance, which we didn't talk about because we didn't review that movie, but he was talking about the romance in that movie because...
No, that movie was worse.
It made some scenes.
That's what I was talking about. You were saying that you were going to compare it to that movie because you said that this movie had a romance even worse than a particular other movie. You were obviously talking about Fury 7.
Actually, I was talking about...
So they didn't know what we were talking about.
I was actually
it wasn't unbearable, but it certainly wasn't needed.
I was actually talking about Thor 1, but okay.
What?
I like Thor 1!
James, they're actually... Like, that scene where they're comparing girlfriends, Iron Man and Thor? I like that.
Yeah, that's good. Like I said, the dynamic between these characters, they get that right. If we're getting into negatives... Ultron was a disappointment, I have to say.
He was like...
Wait, hold on, did y'all think that?
Here, let me say, okay, let's go down the line. I thought some things were...
Go down the line.
I never thought Marvel was strong in the villains category. That's always been their weak point. But I thought Ultron was better in some ways than Loki. I liked that he felt more intimidating and imposing. And I think I liked his... He wasn't a pawn. He had an interesting thing he was working for, but his motive was never clear. I didn't quite like that.
I know that he was so... One of my big negatives about the movie was the first act. It felt really rushed, and it just didn't flow very well with me.
I think Loki's at his best when you're not sure if he is a villain or a kind of a good guy or in the middle or something. That's when Loki's at his best. But with Ultron in this, they kind of just immediately assumed he was a villain, and they just wrote him in as villain. And from the start, he was just villain. And I think they could have done more, because Ultron's is supposed to be one of those villains that isn't necessarily a villain at first, and he's supposed to have like justifiable motives. Like Zod maybe would have justifiable motives.
Yeah,
but they didn't do that.
He was
so well.
Yeah, he was. My major complaint about this movie was the first act felt really rushed, and it didn't feel like it was flowing very well. And Ultron, he felt so rushed. Like you just said, his motivation wasn't really clear. I mean, it is clear. Mankind is terrible. To create peace by starting a war, sure. Motivation of every villain ever made. That's disappointing, but I mean, I kind of knew that because he's AI. He's just kind of in the computers, and he's like, oh, humanity's terrible, and he just kind of goes by a single motivation that sort of like a computer program would do. But that said, for an AI, am I saying that right? AI. I had to go over that and make sure I was in the right order. Okay. When I first saw him in the first trailer, how he was like walking in the first teaser trailer, where he's just kind of like, how could you? What was he saying? And like he just walked in and said, "You're all puppets." He walked in saying, "You're all puppets." He was limping, and that's because he was a damaged robot. But I thought it was because he's an AI learning to be like a human, kind of learning to walk. But in this movie, he was just a human where they slapped a CGI robot. They think it's really like, oh, he's a really cool villain because he's really funny and he like talks so well, and he's got he's really, he's funny. It's so easy. It's not nearly as impressive as you would think, because you just write a human character and then slap a robot in there. Yeah. It would be way more impressive to actually see an AI robot as a villain, because I mean, it's not the first time it would be done before, but on a movie of this scale, that it's never been done before.
Like they could have done 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I would have liked to see. First off, he didn't have nearly enough. He didn't have very many scenes, to be honest. I I felt like he was always off screen.
Yeah.
Like he was just never there, and
like especially during the ending, like the third act, he was never really.
I know, like when I heard his voice in the trailer, I immediately thought of like Smaug because they're kind of similar CGI villains that have a really good voice. But when you watch Smaug in The Hobbit, he is just so much more impactful because there's just a full scene dedicated to him talking to Bilbo, and he's just dominating over Bilbo just with dialogue. And it's just a whole scene, like a 10-minute scene just with him. And Ultron never had a scene like that. He showed up, he talked, and then he showed up another time and he talked, and then he showed up another time, he said some stuff, and then he punched a guy, and then big finale.
So
he never had an impact.
More cons about Ultron was they don't really care, but I feel like his build up was immediately, because like right when in his first scene when you saw him as a program, he was like, so they just talked about his programming to be protecting the Earth and protecting the humans. He was just immediately destroy the humans are bad. Once the humans are destroyed, I'll bring real peace to the world. It was immediate. He was immediately hostile. I wanted, like, maybe to have, like, a internal conflict between himself, and, like, he'd start off good, and then he'd see, like, the Avengers go to do this battle, and then say, hey, they're the ones causing the war or something. But it was just immediately hostile and destroy the humans, so I just didn't really like that.
His point of view saying that he's going to destroy humanity by saving the world, and the thing with the twins hating the Avengers, there was no negative view towards the Avengers in this movie. Like, you never got why the twins hated him, and you never got why Ultron wanted to fight against them as if they were the wall imposing against them. We gotta wrap this up because you gotta leave.
The twins hated him because
Tony Stark, because they saw that bomb, and that's kind of like the Iron Man 1 thing where everybody thought Tony Stark just wanted wars and to sell weapons and stuff like that. So there was a little bit of that, but they never clarified like the turning point of Ultron as an AI. If he's supposed to be good, what actually turned him bad?
Because it was just immediately bad.
Yeah.
Like.
And I felt like he was too physical. He could have been. He's an AI. He should have been more intellectual of a villain. And one of his things is like, they said in a line of dialogue, he's like, I have something the Avengers never can have, harmony. But I never felt like it was his army of other Ultrons. It's supposed to be like they're all one person. Like when Loki multiplies himself, it's supposed to be like that. But in this, it felt like they were all like useless manpower, and he was one figure. I never thought Ultron was supposed to be like that.
However, pros for Ultron would be he's a lot more menacing than Loki. He's a lot more, I mean, he's one-sided, but that's actually a con for me, but he's kind of straight to the point in his villainy. He's not very tedious, so Loki had, his main villain was this Thor. At first he didn't really care about the Avengers, but when the Avengers teamed up with Thor, obviously, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Alright.
Good talking. Alright, Brandon provided many valuable things to this review, but we must move on. Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about Ultron?
We were talking about Ultron.
Okay, I think we covered Ultron. How about...
Yeah, pretty much.
What else do we not like? The twins...
I like the twins.
I like them, but did the Russian accents get on your nerves?
Actually, no.
See?
Something else I didn't like about the twins was that, I think we already mentioned it, but they didn't really have any motives to be evil at first. They just... Okay, besides the fact that they saw Tony Stark's bombshell...
No, here's the thing.
But they kind of just signed up for it like, well, you're just going to be evil because...
They just wanted to kill the Avengers,
I like that.
But that wasn't...
I feel like it's like this. It's like that European, or the Eastern European, they don't really know exactly what the Avengers are doing. They see them as a bad. It's almost like how...
You mean like how they were rioting against the...
they saw it more as corruption and
or as
tyranny. But anyway,
oppression.
no, I like them. And Scarlet Witch is the one that kind of starts the conflict.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that she has to take responsibility when she becomes a hero, like a good guy.
Yeah, I purely mentioned them just because I wanted to say that the Russian accents were not a negative.
Yeah, they were not negative.
Like, they just did not take me out of the movie.
ethnic flavor. Alright, one thing, this is not negative, this is a thing I liked. I liked Bruce Banner and Tony Stark. They're kind of off to the side for some of this, and they have this idea together that they're kind of hiding from the other Avengers, like Thor and Captain America, who they know will not support it because, you know, they're very, like, anti, you know, they're more old-fashioned and they don't want this, but they have this dream that creates Ultron, and I like that whole dynamic of them, I don't know, the other Avengers were not in the loop, and that made tension, and then they knew they were right, they knew what they were trying to do, but they had to keep it a secret, and then that led to one character who everyone knows about him, but we can't really say much about him.
Vision was the X-Men Quicksilver of this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, not entirely. He didn't have a scene where he completely stole the show, which is what I was expecting. But I mean, he was.
But he was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, he didn't steal the show. He was a good surprise, mostly because they didn't show him the trailers. Which, by the way, can I mention something about the trailers? Everyone is saying that you barely see anything in the movie. I feel like I saw half the movie just from the trailers. Like, they showed way too much, I think. Mm-hmm. Everyone was saying that you don't see anything. I think it showed too much.
So I want to touch on Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver as an Avengers instead of as the villains. I think they actually fitted well in the Avengers because, I mean, their powers were useful for them. Their character change and them taking responsibility was good.
That's not a spoiler because you see in the trailer, you see Quicksilver hitting Ultron before he kills Captain America's stunt double. You see all those.
But I like their action scenes. Quicksilver's was cool, and like at one point. They were like warning the civilians, and he like ran to the police officers. He's like, everyone needs to get out, and they ran out, and the police officers like kind of ignored him, kept talking on the computers, and they ran back in there with AK-47 and shot it around some, and he's like, get out, and they ran back. It added to comic relief. It felt they were good Avenger characters. I don't think they'll be in the next Avengers, but I don't know.
It was a good addition to the fighting style.
Yeah, it was. It added flavor, it added diversity, and it just added another couple more characters. They didn't mess up with them. I thought they did good with them for the action and the turning point.
That's the one thing I was thinking of these twins. I was like, man, they add so much flavor in this movie. But I get what you're saying. Okay, any other things that we want to touch on? I want to say that
the vibranium kind of subplot was weird, but
yeah, I didn't really know.
Well, you kind of just didn't kind of get what was going on until Iron Man said exactly what Ultron was doing. He's like, Ultron's doing this. Like, I wouldn't have gotten whatever Ultron was doing in the third act if Iron Man didn't tell Thor what he was doing and how they might be able to stop it.
Yeah,
it wasn't the most cohesive thing. Yeah, now that I think about it.
I'll tell you this: the main Avengers weren't the strongest characters in this. Iron Man. He wasn't the strongest character in this.
No, he didn't.
Like, all the characters seemed like they had a lesser role in this. They didn't seem as impactful, but they seemed like they had already. Like, it showed that they had already made the impact in Avengers 1.
Yeah, like I said, that their dynamic was good, but each character had more presence in the first Avengers, I felt like.
One thing I did like about Ultron is the language he used and a lot of his lines. I liked his apocalyptic type language and some
allegory.
Of his... it was kind of allegorical, and I liked a lot of the quotes that he made. I'm
glad you brought up Ultron, because I wanted to say another negative about him. To me, he didn't look good. From a visual standpoint, If you look at something like the Transformers films, if you compare the robots in the first movie to the robots of the fourth movie, robots in the first movie they look like they're like dirty, like they have like dirt and dust on their metal, and they're not like shiny. They look more real. Yeah, they have more more depth to their colors, the color scheme. And then in Transformers 4, they were so shiny, and it just looked fake. The colors were very vibrant. They stood out, which they looked good, but they looked fake. Ultron leans more towards Transformers 4 in terms of the special effects. He did not look very good to me.
Another negative I had about the movie was the sound. Like, I heard Paul was complaining about the soundtrack, but I mean, I don't really know. If I was going to listen to the soundtrack, I'd just listen to the Avengers 1 soundtrack, but the sounding didn't seem like the...
This might just be the theater we were in. We're not sure.
I saw a huge fiery explosion, and I didn't... And I've been playing Battlefield 4 with my new headset. Hold on. I just want to say this. I got a new headset, and that makes the sound so much better. But like, those explosions sounded so real. I mean, it was in a video game. It was with a headset, but
And with
this is a multi-million-dollar movie, and the sound just didn't sound up to par on it.
Yeah, this might just be the movie theater, but what he's saying is that when an explosion goes off in a movie, and it's not just you don't just hear the explosion sound. You hear kind of a vibration. You kind of feel it rather than just hear it. This movie, it might have just been the theater, but there were so many scenes. Like there was like a scene where the Quinjet is just flying. It flies by the camera. It was just like you didn't feel like there were engines right there. Like it was just like the sound was just so off, and it took me out of the movie so much.
Captain America, like Thor would hit Captain America's shield occasionally, and I heard remember the first time in Avengers 1 when
it wasn't
Captain America just hit the shield real hard, and you felt that
you felt
and you saw like the sort of the shockwave. I didn't feel anything, even though there was it made like a shockwave, and it blasted for like 500 feet or so.
Yeah,
it knocked robots back and stuff, but I just didn't feel like the sound had an impact on this at all.
I know there was something off. It might have just been our theater, as I keep saying, but there was, at least for our experience, there was something off. But we can't use that as a negative towards the movies, because I feel like if we saw it a second time in a different theater, it would be different.
Yeah, with maybe
remember Dark Knight Rises?
First time I saw
it. There was like a static.
Every time the sound would get loud, it would be like.
They were popping. It
sounded like gunshots.
Yeah, I was scared.
All right, so I think we can we get to our ratings?
Yeah.
We kind of have to sum up what we thought of it. Okay, who wants to go first?
I'll tell you Brandon's first.
Brandon had to leave.
Brandon gave it, personally, an 8 out of 10, which I thought was low. And he gave it a theoretical 7 out of 10. So that was Brandon's.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go first, I guess. Right. My rating for personal is an 8.5 out of 10.
Don't go decimals, just say 9. You have to round it. I don't like that. I don't like using decimals.
But this one's actually a decimal. It's between 8 and 9. It's not a full 9, it's not a full 8.
It rounds to 9.
I like. But it's not. I like Kingsman more. Fine.
If you want to use decimals,
it's an 8.5 out of 10, but it can round to a 9 out of 10.
Okay, yeah.
And my theoretical, regardless of the sound, is an 8 out of 10, and with the sound, it's a 7 out of 10, because the sound, I don't know if the sound was just our theater or not, but
sound is part of
the sound. I know, but the sound just didn't sound right. So,
I was gonna say
if you watch in a really good theater and it sounded amazing, then theoretical would be out of 10. But if you thought the sound wasn't very good, then it's a 7 out of 10.
Right, do you want to go?
Yeah, my theoretical I'll give it an 8 theoretical, because it was flawed. But then again, as much as these negatives we have been saying, it's still really good. But Marvel movies need to be, at this point, they need to be held to a higher standard, and it wasn't quite the sequel that everyone was hoping for. But then on the other hand, personally, I have no problem giving this a 10, because I loved it. It was so fun. It kicked a ton of butt. I still love all those characters, new characters. Ultron, some things I did like about him. He was a source of a lot of the problems, but then again, there were some things that I liked about him more than Loki. I found the story to be more interesting, and it was a great time, and it's still definitely. I mean, I'm still excited for Marvel, and I don't consider this a mess up. I just consider it not as good as it could have been, or as it should have been.
It's definitely still worth seeing. I mean,
yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say 9 out of 10, because,
For which one?
For personal. I know I gave it an 8.5, but the story was a lot more interesting than the first Avengers. So
be quiet.
Okay, you were talking about how it isn't like a mess up or anything. I'm gonna start mine off by saying, rating it among the Marvel movies. I think. As far as my favorite Marvel movie of all time, in terms of the cinematic universe, is probably still going to be Iron Man 1. And I just say that because I want to get out that I like one of my favorite critics. He said something that I'm paraphrasing, but I really liked what he said. He said that these movies have become more about costumes than characters, And I like that because these movies are becoming more driven by what has to happen and not necessarily what would happen from these characters. But anybody who sees these movies knows that even though that's partially true, these characters feel pretty well driven. So that said, Iron Man 1's probably my favorite. Guardians of the Galaxy, maybe. And then maybe the first Avengers. And then it would be the Winter Soldier, and I don't know where Age of Ultron would fit in there. But I still have to debate about that, because I didn't like the Winter Soldier as much as everyone else. But I think I'm going to give it an 8 for both, because I thought it was a very fun movie, obviously. I'm going to buy it on Blu-ray. I liked watching it. But something about the first act for me didn't flow. It felt rushed, and I wasn't into it. Like, the first action sequence is really cool, because it's a long, uncut shot. Normally, those would get me into movies. But I just wasn't into it, and part of it might have been the sound as well. I just felt kind of out of it. And the third act, the final battle, you might think it would get boring because, you've seen it before with all the Avengers standing in a circle, fighting. But even though I had flaws with it, whereas I didn't know where it was going to go, and when the third act, when the battle was going to end, I didn't know where it was going. I didn't entirely know what was even happening, which is a big flaw. But it still had a lot of energy to it, which normally you wouldn't think would be there because you've already seen it before. But there was still so much energy. I was still kind of cheering a little bit when certain things would happen. It still had that energy.
Yeah,
so
it never got boring.
Yeah, it didn't. It was still very fun to watch. It flew by. I did check my phone. I did check the time a few times, though, because I just wanted to see how much time it would have, because during the third act, again, I didn't know where it was going. But ultimately, I had a good time with it. It didn't flow very well in the first act. Like I said, the third act had some gaps where I was like, okay, where's this going? And some things didn't make sense. Like, there's a thing in the third act, Nick Fury shows up, which ultimately makes sense when you think about it, but when I saw it, I was like, just what? So it had a few things like that. But ultimately, I enjoyed it. I had fun. I think these two were expecting me to tear this movie apart and give it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, you were. When we were driving back, you were like, oh my gosh, Ben hated it. No, I just sat there and thought about it.
I just want to say one last thing. I thought they did a lot better job with Hawkeye on this, except I feel that Hawkeye's action wasn't as good as in this. He was kind of like sniping on buildings, and he was kind of like, I don't know, in the first one. I just like, his action was better in the first one, but his character was much better in this one. And yeah, he made, like, he was just better. So.
Summing up this movie, Hawkeye was better. Thank you for watching, average people. We will see you all in a long time from now. Aim for average.